My name is Gaspar Rivera Salgado. I'm the director of the Center for Mexican Studies here at UCLA. And we want to welcome you to this second seminar of this series that we have of a series of seminars called Challenges Facing Mexico's Next President in Mexico. It's one of those occasions where this is electoral year, not only for Mexico, but in the United States. So we're immersed in a lot of political discussion. So we wanted to really have a step back and try to see the large picture. The last time, about 3 weeks ago, we had Yasnaya Aguilar with us talking about the challenges about policies regarding indigenous people in Mexico. And we are for a good treat today. But before we start, I would like to do our UCLA land acknowledgement. The Center for Mexican Studies at UCLA acknowledges our presence on the traditional, ancestral, and ancestral territory of the Gabrielino Tonga people. Thank you for everybody who braved the weather. People thought that it was going to rain today, but actually it turned out to be a beautiful day in LA. We are able to see the sun. So for those of you who are online, you miss going out and seeing the sun. So today, I have the great pleasure of introducing to you all Paolo Marinaro, who's going to present a paper called The Impact of the Labor Law Reform on the US Mexico Canada Trade Agreement on Worker Organizing and Collective Bargaining in Mexico. We're very fortunate to have Paolo Marinaro with us. He's a lecturer with us here at UCLA in labor studies. He's teaching a very innovative class on cross-border organizing. It's a binational class, and we have the team here that is supporting him. And this class incorporates not only students from UCLA, but also from 3 universities in Mexico. So we're working with the National University of Mexico at UNAM, the Metropolitan University, UAM, and the Universidad Autónoma de Querétaro in the industrial belt north of Mexico. So that's very nice. And also, Paolo Marinaro is what we call a global citizen. He's originally from Italy. He studied at the University of Turin, the history of ideas, philosophy and history of ideas. And then he got a master's degree in sociology at the University of Turin. Then he went to Mexico to do a PhD in sociology at UNAM. And he did a dissertation on the auto industry. And then he's been a postdoctoral fellow at different universities in the United States, at the Center for US Mexican Studies there at UC San Diego, at Penn State. He's also been affiliated with the Center for Global Labor Rights, which is a wonderful program that attracts people from all over the world. And more recently, he was hired as the country director for the Solidarity Center, the international arm of the American Federation of Labor Congress of the Industrial Organizations. They have offices all over the world, but the Mexico office is one of the largest, if not the largest office that they have. So from that point of view, from that vantage point, Paolo Marinaro is fully versed in watching the development of the implementation of this incredible labor law reform. You know, not many times we have the opportunity to witness how a country manages to redo the entire legal framework for workers. So Paolo Marinaro has been watching that, observing and working with a set of researchers, with labor organizers, with NGOs in Mexico. So from that point of view, he's going to share with us his assessment about how Mexico is doing with this implementation, especially as it pertains to labor rights for workers, but also what are the challenges facing the next president for Mexico. So help me welcome Paolo Marinaro to UCLA. Welcome, Paolo.
Okay, thanks, Gaspar. Thanks, everyone. Thanks to the Center for Mexican Studies for the opportunity to have a conversation about labor organizing in Mexico, and particularly about the impact of the labor law reform and the United States-Mexico-Canada agreement on freedom of association and the right to bargain collectively. And before we get into the opportunities and challenges of these institutional reforms, I want to make sure that we are all on the same page on why this is important for not only for Mexican workers and for the Mexican labor movement, but also for U.S. workers and for U.S. labor. Um, in fact, Mexico is the first trading partner, the first U.S. trading partner, right? Actually, in 2023, for the first time in a few years, Mexico surpassed China. China is the U.S. top trade partner with over $600 billion in trade between the two countries. And in the context of highly integrated North American economy, uh, the interests of U.S. workers are structurally linked to the interests of the Mexican labor movement. So if workers in Mexico are capable of negotiating good contracts, are able of organizing, they would also raise the bar for the U.S. labor movement. Um, in fact, despite this structural connection between the economy in North America, uh, the average wage gap between a U.S. worker and a Mexican worker is 9-1 average. Because if you look at specific sector, that gap can be even bigger and larger. An average Mexican auto worker earn about $20 per day for a 12-hour work shift in many cases. Even in huge facilities like GM, 7,000 workers in the state of Guanajuato. And that was the average wage. And we know that in the US, we have different daily wage, but it's definitely the hour work is definitely one of the most well paid manufacturing workers in the state. So this wage gap is profound difference between the salary in Mexico and the US is being used by employer, by transnational corporation to establish what we used to call the race to the bottom, right? We shut down union factories in the US and relocate production to Mexico and to take advantage of like exploitative working conditions, very low salaries and precarious working conditions. And we also can undermine the demands of the US labor movement at the bargaining table under the threat of movie production to Mexico. So this is the situation that we've been facing as the North American labor movement and the situation that many US unions have been facing in the last few decades. And one important issue, one important actor in keeping low wages in Mexico for the last few decades and basically promoting this platform for foreign direct investment, paradoxically, are unions, which we usually expect unions to represent workers. And in fact, 85% of unions in Mexico, based on data of the Secretary of Labor, are known as employer protection unions. So, which is a very peculiar term for those who are not versed in labor in this experience of labor in Mexico. So, employer protection unions are organizations that sign sweetheart agreements with employers who invest and produce in Mexico. Sweetheart agreement means that they establish the lowest conditions set by the law. In many cases, they sign this contract without workers' consent. So workers don't know they have a union. Sometimes they sign this contract like years before the company actually had hired workers, before the company opened a factory in Mexico. If you can see, I'm going to use my mouse so that even folks from home can see. This is a screenshot of the website of CTM, la Confederación de Trabajadores de México, the largest union confederation in Mexico, in San Luis Potosí, in the state of San Luis Potosí. So BMW, one of the largest car manufacturers, were very well certified in terms of social sustainability by the German government, the International Agency. In 2018, opened a factory in the state of San Luis Potosí, a large manufacturing facility that is still operating right now. Well, in 2014, they already had a collective bargaining agreement. They didn't have a factory. There was no warehouse. They didn't have workers. So how did they sign a collective bargaining agreement? Well, they can easily and from their comfortably from the office in Berlin, they can go online to the website of CTM, download one of these templates. It's a small in the picture, but these are templates of collective bargaining agreement in the languages of the major car manufacturer: German, Korean, Japanese, with the lowest conditions set by the labor law in Mexico. So they could just download the template. The HR from the headquarters, the HR person would sign the contract, send it back to the local of the CTM in San Luis Potosí. And that was the bargaining process was reduced to. So they had already a collective bargaining agreement 4 years before they start operation in the States. So this is clearly not a democratic process, and of course violate all the international convention established by the International Labor Organization and even the Mexican labor law. And when workers then get hired and start working, in many cases they don't know they have a union. It's not that they sign a collective bargaining agreement and then they do like a meeting with all the workforce to show the contract. In most of the cases they never see a copy of the contract. So this gives total power to the employer to implement whatever sort of working condition they want, work shift, pays, salary. There's no reference for workers to rely on when they get to have demands or come up with demands. So this sort of union that I just mentioned is the large part of the majority of unions in Mexico. They clearly play a strategic role in keeping wages low and create this platform for foreign direct investment. So I wanted to give you this context. Yes, please.
I just think it's important to add that what's in it for the unions, they still collect dues. Even if the workers don't know the union exists, that the unions are collecting the dues through the employer.
They still collect dues, and in some cases, they don't collect dues from workers, but they get funding from the employer, which is even more controversial because who's giving you, who's funding you, and who's going to represent at the end of the day. So this is definitely like an important contradiction that created these or allowed these race to the bottom that just basically describing a huge wage gap between US and Mexican workers. So it's important to have this context because the labor law reform actually focuses on freedom of association and the right to bargain collectively and restructure the institution that regulate the registration of unions, the registration of collective bargaining agreement to try to eradicate the problem of employee protection unions. So the labor law reform launched in 2019 by the Andrés Manuel López Obrador administration establishes a new labor justice system for conciliating and resolving disputes. And also to register union and conduct election is called the Federal Center for Labor Conciliation and Registration, el Centro Federal de Conciliación y Registro Laboral. It also establishes new labor courts at the local level that are in charge, that proceeds over labor disputes. The labor reform also establishes that union representative must be elected by free and secret vote. It also establishes that the request to negotiate a collective bargaining agreement must be supported by at least 30% of the affected workers and must be demonstrated by a so-called certificado de representatividad, certificate of representation. So that means that if, for instance, when BMW will open the new electric vehicle factory in San Luis Potosí, where they already allocated an important investment, they won't be able to sign a contract 2 years before. You must get to the factory, you must open the factory, hire the workers, and then demonstrate that workers sign up to that union. So that's institutionally an important transformation. Also, the labor law reform establishes, among other rules or short provisions, that all negotiated collective bargaining agreements must be ratified by a secret ballot. So again, I can't just sign the contract with the HR director because then workers must support, at least the majority of workers must support, endorse that contract and that negotiation. And finally, with a process that probably has been the first in history, all collective bargaining agreements had to be submitted to a so-called legitimization process based on free and secret ballot by May 2023, which means that all unionized workers in Mexico had to vote if they wanted to continue with the union and the contract they already had, or if they wanted to get rid of them and just start a new organizing process or renegotiate a new contract. So these are some of the most interesting reforms that are part of the labor law reform that redesign the institutional infrastructure that regulate labor relations in Mexico. And then the United States, Mexico, Canada agreement also introduces new labor provisions and new innovative enforcement mechanisms. So in July 2021, the USMCA became official. Among the main differences between the NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, the previous agreement for free trade in North America, the USMCA includes labor provision that focus on freedom of association and the right to bargain collectively. And also on the elimination of forced labor and child labor, but mainly on freedom of association and the right to bargain collectively in specific sectors of the economy, manufacturing industry in particular, right? Auto, aerospace, but also services like the call center sector, but mainly in the manufacturing industry. What is particularly interesting is that in addition of the chapter on labor provision, the USMCA also includes enforcement mechanism. Annex 23A introduces an innovative facility-specific rapid response complaint mechanism, which is called the rapid response labor mechanism. What is innovative of this mechanism is that it's facility-wide. So the sanctions apply directly to the companies in traded sectors, to specific workplaces, not to the signatory government. So it's not, we're not applying sanction, or the United States is not applying sanction to the Mexican government if they realize that companies in Mexico do not respect freedom of association and the right to bargain collectively, but apply a specific sanction to the factory where the violation has occurred. And in cases of non-compliance with this obligation, the rapid response labor mechanism provides for the suspension of USMCA tariff benefits or the imposition of other penalties that can get to the denial of entry of goods from business that are repeat offenders. So basically, if you violate repeatedly the right to bargain collectively or freedom of association in a specific factory, the United States Trade Representative can close the border to the goods of that factory. And we have an example, we have various examples. All these workers use these tools to protect their right to organize and bargain collectively. We have the on the top right, Texit in Coahuila, Stellantis Group. At the time of the organization, after 8 years of struggle, they were able to recognize their independent union, negotiate a new contract, reinstate 36 workers with back pays up to 8 years of back pay. GM is the first case. GM in Silao, 7,000 workers after the manipulation of the previous union. They file a rapid response mechanism. They're able to repeat the union election and won. The independent union wins the representation at the factory. They recently changed election. To give you an example of how heavy these sanctions are and the kind of pressure that they can put on an employer, I think that the GM case is particularly interesting. So the old process can last up to 100 days because as soon as the workers file a petition for a systematic and ongoing denial of rights, the US government has 30 days to investigate the denegation of rights. If the US government recognizes that there's a denegation of rights, they pass the ball to the Mexican government. And the Mexican government has 45 days to investigate. So we have a total of 75 days. And then they have to come up with a remediation protocol. If they can provide remediation to the denegation of rights, then the case will be resolved. Otherwise, it can get to a panel to decide the sanction. But what is particularly relevant is that during these 75 days or these 100 days, US Trade representatives suspend liquidation for exportation to the factory. So General Motors is exporting $10 million worth of vehicles per day. In 100 days, they got suspended $1 billion, right? Yes, $1 billion. I did the right math, the math right? So $1 billion is a lot of money even for GM, right? And if they don't resolve, they can lose that money. So at this point, you have to really weigh what is best for you in terms of pros and cons and benefits. Like a rational actor. Like, are you going to lose $1 billion just to support and promote the same corrupt organization that stole ballots and tried to manipulate the union elections, etc.? Or you're gonna accept that you're gonna have an independent union and you have to sit at the bargaining table and see what they get in terms of wage increase. And they choose the second, right? This is what they did. So really interesting tools available for the labor movement to protect freedom of association and the right to bargain collectively. And these are some of the cases, well, these are all the cases where the rapid response mechanism has been used so far in Mexico. Triton X, Panasonic, Textillo de Mexico, former Stellantis, BU Manufacturing, Saint-Gobain, Unique Fabricating, GM Silao, Goodyear. You see some important names like Caterpillar, Atento in the call center sector. Massier is like a cargo air company, and most of the cases in the automotive sector. We don't have. We can get into the details of these cases if you have a question about it. But for now, I'm gonna move forward. So, USMCA provides an important tool, and this is like the first time in history that we have this sort of tool, like a facility-wide enforcement mechanism with sanctions. There's no other free trade agreement that has the same tool. Hopefully, there will be in the future. And what is the impact on labor relations, particularly for the labor, thinking about the labor law reform? One important process is the legitimization of collective bargaining agreement. So based on data from the Secretary of Labor, we have 139,000 CBA in Mexico. Only 30,520 have been legitimized, which means that 108,000 contracts have expired, don't exist anymore. Those workplaces are union free right now, and they expired because nobody took over and the responsibility to legitimize the contract. So basically, only 287 have been voted down, which is a small minority. But the large majority of contracts just expired because there was no union that really could legitimize the contract. Not even simulate a legitimization. Right? There was no way to do that. So that has an important impact on union density. We just have some data from the Secretary of Labor recently published in 2024, some data on union density. I think we can debate the data. It seems that union density has grown, but it's not. It is controversial to understand how is it possible that union density increased if we have 8,000 contracts less. So I think we need to have a conversation about the way that union density can be calculated, and if we divide the number of union workers by the total number of workers active in Mexico, or if we only focus on the workers that are employed in the formal economy, which is the way they calculate union density. But this is a question for the future, right? Because this is really fresh information that need to be considered and studied. But what we do know is that we have 100,000 contracts that expired. So in these workplaces, workers don't have a union, right? Which is an opportunity for the independent labor movement, for a grassroots worker-led organization to build power and increase their capacity and increase density. But it also became a growing market for US-based union-busting law firms that are opening new offices in Mexico to try to protect the employers and keep the workplace union-free. So the larger, the major union-busting firms are opening in Mexico right now. There are basically anti-union law firms. There are new corporatist unions. So there are old employer protection unions that change their name with some catchy name like Transformación Sindical, like Union Transformation, the Independent Union of the Automotive Sector. And it's the same family related to the old party, but they are trying to kind of take over the contract that expired in those employers. And we also have some concern about those 30,000 that were actually confirmed, because this was like a very ambitious operation for the Mexican Labor Authority. How you oversee 139,000 votes that can happen at the same time. So there was no previous schedule. So the union would apply for the legitimization, and most of the union applied during the last year in 2023. So in those 5 months, they had thousands of legitimization. So the Labor Authority didn't have the capacity to oversee all those processes. And the labor justice system also didn't have the capacity to enforce labor provision in those cases. In fact, based on the labor law reform, a union could hire a private notary to validate the legitimization process. So you have an employer protection union with a very well-documented history of corruption that now is in charge of the process of legitimization and can pay a private notary to validate the process. So we're not sure what actually happened in those 30,000 cases, but we can think that in some of those cases, the process of simulation that has been happening for many, many decades continues through during this phase. So we have a very interesting institutional reforms. We have as many as it's understandable for such an ambitious project. We have many limitations, but we also had an important opportunity for worker-led organizations. In fact, when workers organized, the labor law reform and the USMCA did provide useful tools to protect freedom of association and the right to bargain collectively. More than 30,000 workers have organized with independent unions in the last 2 years. There are new emerging worker-led organizations like the Liga Sindical Obrera Mexicana, the Sangoben Independent Union, Cintia, the union that won the union election at GM Silao, el Sindicato Independiente Nacional de Trabajadores y Trabajadoras de la Industria Automotriz, the National Independent Union of Workers in the Automotive Industry. SNITIS, that emerged after one of the largest strikes in the history of the Mexican labor movement in 2018, Matamoros, in addition to the already existing independent union. So these organizations demonstrated they can lead successful organizing drive, even in strategic companies such as Stellantis, GM, Goodyear, Caterpillar, and they also demonstrated they can negotiate good contracts. Extraordinary wage increase for what Mexico was used to. Goodyear workers were able to negotiate up to a 30% increase in 1 year. We're all really excited for the outcome of these workers, and we look with a lot of hope for the future. But in many other factors, like Stellantis, 15.8%, Saint-Gobain, 11%, another factory around 12%. In a country where usually the increase point was below the inflation rate. So in 2022, 2023, we had a very high inflation rate, about 6.7%, and all these union bargain contract way well above the inflation rate. They included gender protocol for inclusivity and to avoid sexual harassment inside the factory. As I mentioned before, there are many cases where they were able to negotiate the reinstatement of workers with back pay. And in the case of Goodyear workers, this is from yesterday, I think. Yes, this is not Reuters from yesterday. 4.2 million in back pay. This is the 30% increase. Because in the case of Goodyear workers, they went through a similar process of what I just described for GM, led the union drive, went through a union election that was manipulated by the same union leader of GM and Texit. So they filed Teresa Medina. They filed a rapid response labor mechanism. They repeat the union election. They win the union election, and they bargain a contract. Except that in the case of the tire industry, in Mexico, there's a industry-wide agreement, which is called Contrato Ley, which was inactive because all these employee protection unions signed individual agreement. So Goodyear workers, La Liga, the local of La Liga in Goodyear, were able to reactivate the sectoral bargaining agreement. So this opens up to an important opportunity for the future and a strategic innovation in collective bargaining in Mexico, where most of the contracts are factory-wide. So industry-wide agreement really provide an opportunity to stop the race to the bottom, because you need, if this contract really, if the Goodyear workers are able to reactivate the coalition that coordinate the contract that covers all the factories in the tire industry, if tomorrow a tire company wants to invest in Mexico and produce in Mexico, they will have to meet the minimum standard set by the industry-wide contract. So this is huge advancement for collective bargaining. Again, this is a very, very small percentage of workers, even if we're talking about 30,000 workers compared to 30 million workers in Mexico, right? But it gives us like some hope on how we can use these tools. And also, I think it demonstrates that, institutional reforms can set favorable conditions for organizing, but if workers don't organize, we're not going to see any changes, right? The labor law reform, it's something written on paper, but if we want to take advantage of the opportunity created by the institutional reforms, we need workers that are willing to organize. So, yeah, I didn't remember what was in the next slide. So now just to close and then open up to questions. We have like a very ambitious set of institutional reforms that kind of change to some extent the rule of the games for labor relations in Mexico. We have many limitations, and if you have questions, we can get into what are actually these limitations, what can be done to improve the implementation, to strengthen the institution already existing. But we also have some interesting successful organizing drive. We have important contract negotiation. We have new emergent unions that demonstrate that they can lead a successful organizing drive and can negotiate good contract. So what comes next? What can we do next? And I know that the main question is what is going to do the next government, but I also want to ask, what are we going to do as activists, as scholars, as labor leaders to take advantage of the current situation? I think that an important next steps would be to really strengthen the relationship with this organization, to foster more union-to-union relationships, worker-to-worker, and strengthen the alliance across the supply chain. Again, we go back to where we started. We have like a very we live in a very integrated North American economy. And if US workers, US labor want to improve their working conditions, they can't forget that they have a large part of the production that is happening in Mexico. And if the Mexican labor movement want to raise the bar on their demands, they also have to build alliance solidarity with workers in the US. So 2 years ago, all these new emerging unions open to organize didn't exist. We had an independent labor movement, but not very keen to organize. Now we have organizations that are doing it. Can we think about North American supply chain agenda, North American supply chain alliance, an organizing agenda for the North American supply chain? I think that this could be like a potential next steps where both the Mexican labor movement, US labor leaders, scholars, students, we all have something to contribute. So and these photos are all real life. It's not something that happened in the past. This is happening right now, right? We have the UAW strike with an amazing vision, the UAW union to 2028. We have a number of new unions in Mexico in the automotive industry and in other sectors. So I think it's time to reconsider the relationship and think about solidarity not only in a theoretical way or not only in an ideological way, but about concrete action that we can take in the supply chain with power. Thank you.
Thank you, Paolo. So a lot of food for thought. And so let's take some questions in the room before we go to folks online. So I see Ruben and Fernando. Okay.
Thank you, Paolo. This is very interesting, very exciting developments. I have many questions. I'm going to ask a couple of comments. One, I'm going to ask you just to say a little bit more about these union busting bureaus or organizations, firms that you mentioned. You didn't mention any specific names, but I was actually I'm quite curious about who these actors are, how they operate, in Mexico. The other thing that I wanted to ask you, and this is in relation to the theme of the series organized by the Center for Mexican Studies, which is sort of the role of politics, the role of the state here. There is always an implementation gap, right? When you have these kind of reforms, progressive reforms, right? You refer to it in part as a kind of capacity or lack of capacity, right? In the case of the federal government in Mexico, the Ministry of Labor, Secretaría del Trabajo. I'm wondering, I mean, the numbers that you provided here are just like, sort of daunting in terms of the task of just sort of monitoring, certifying, enforcing some of these things. And it doesn't look like the Mexican government, even sort of a progressive government that is not that willing to expand the size of the bureaucracy, of the federal bureaucracy, would be capable of really monitoring and enforcing some of these laws. So I also want to, I guess, put that on the table and get your reaction. Thank you.
Thanks, Ruben. How do we get questions?
That's maybe a multi-pronged question, so maybe we should address that first.
So, as I'm going to start with the second question. The role of the state, the current government played an important role. The part of the labor law reform comes from previous administration, but this administration is the one that actually implemented it. And there is an important reconfiguration of the institutional infrastructure that actually changed the role of the state in labor relations. So I mentioned the new labor justice system. Before the labor law reform, the institution that presided over labor relations, that recognized unions, that registered collective bargaining agreement, recognized strike, was the Junta de Conciliación y Arbitraje, the Board of Conciliation and Arbitration, which again is an institution with a very well documented history of corruption. not only that, but the Junta de Conciliación Arbitraje was directly connected to the ruling party, to the executive power. So it gave the administration and the ruling party for many decades was the same party, the party of the Institutional Revolution, PRI, PRI, full power on recognizing unions. Which union is going to be allowed to represent workers in Mexico? And what contract negotiation I will recognize, what contract I will sign on or not. So the fact that we create that the government created a new institution is important in thinking about how the relationship between the labor movement and the state has changed. They also play an important role in not playing an active role in these 2 years because many strikes were repressed in the past. Many union drive were not recognized by the labor authority. And in this case, the state didn't play an active role in repressing workers. They tried to organize, for instance. So that's also an important transformation. In terms of the lack of capacity, I mean, again, this was a very ambitious process. So, and this is like a very recent reform. So the institution needs to be established, strengthened, and I think that it's understandable that there were shortcomings and limitation. The fact is how much the next administration will be ready and open to strengthen those processes, to the implementation of the labor law reform, to strengthen those institutions. So I think that's an important challenge for the new administration. And in terms of the law firms, some of the major law firms have opened offices. Unfortunately, this is not my computer and my phone died, so I don't have the names on the top of my head, but I'm going to share it with you, and I can share it with the rest of the folks that are attending online through the Facebook live. But the largest law firm in the US already opened office in Mexico City, hired new partners, new associates, and they are taking over this growing market of union-free workplaces. And also, as long as the union cannot play that repressive role, at least not as it did in the past, now employer will try to find new partners to reduce labor costs, to reduce compliance to the minimum available, established by the law. So these are two important processes, and I think that if the role of the new administration in provide continuity to the current reform is one of the main challenge in terms of labor relation in Mexico.
Thank you. Fernando?
Thank you for that optimistic talk. I mean it. We do need some optimistic views on labor. My question is very simple. So do you see these new unions, independent unions, forming in new industries, meaning in newly established factories, plants, or all businesses as before?
It's a challenging process, as again, also a very ambitious challenge for the labor movement. These are, again, they did demonstrate that they can, lead successful strike. At the same time, these workers had zero union experience because they come from workplace without any union. They never joined a union meeting, never bargained a contract. So there's a lot of capacity to build for them, a lot to learn. And a lot, and also these organizations are even though are national organizations like Cintia, SMITIS, La Liga, they are all national organizations, so they can organize at the national level. In the case of La Liga, it's a multi-sector union, while Cintia is focusing on the automotive sector. They also have to develop the structure of a national union, which is not it's a difficult task. So we have to think in terms of years, at least. At least this idea of strengthening the alliance in supply chains, we have to think at least in the next 5 years. And in terms of potential industry-wide efforts, and strengthening the structure, we have to think in decades. Because again, this is, we look at the Employer Protection Union, we talk about NAFTA, but this is a model that's been established in Mexico in the early 19th century, the model of control of the labor movement and workers. So it's deeply entrenched in the structure of society, and it can be fixed in 2 years or 3 years.
So, pretty briefly, so do you think that, for instance, the new Tesla plant that they're gonna put together,
yeah.
that's an opportunity for people to organize?
That's right, particularly for electric vehicles and the automotive sector. And I think that that's where we should really think about how we can strengthen the alliances between US and Mexican labor movement. Because we need to make sure that those factories will actually stick to the process when it comes to voting for a union. And if we leave it to the labor authority, they may not have the capacity to be there that day. But if we have the labor movement, the North American labor movement sitting in front of the factory to make sure that that they will respect the process, I think that might be helpful. And I feel that that's possible. That's possible. And there's not only Tesla. There's BMW is opening a huge facility in San Luis Potosí. So in terms of electric vehicle, this is it's a growing market in Mexico. It wasn't one of the largest exporters so far, but since 2023, the investment has multiplied exponentially. So, and because of the rule of origin that established how much of a car must be produced in North America based on the USMCA, a large part of the electric vehicle can be produced in Mexico and exported to the US market. So this will be growing and growing, and the policy in California for the transition by 2035, it's going to make California like a huge market. So this is important for the labor movement in general, both in the US and Mexico, particularly for California. So something to think about what we keep doing in the future.
Let me go to online and then we'll go back to the room. There are two questions from folks participating online. Ruben Garcia asked if there is statistics in terms of number of work action, picket lines, protests, strike, etc. And Jonathan Post asked what are the most relevant takeaways from recent Mexican Labor Secretary data on implementation of the labor law reform, especially how reliable is the official data on elections held with a secret ballot?
Good questions. Statistic on work action. The Secretary of Labor recently published the statistics on strikes in Mexico. That's the only collective action that is registered at the national level. We, as the Solidarity Center, are working on a more inclusive record of the kind of action that happened in the last few years after the labor law reform. What you can, one important take is that at least you do have strikes that are happening. Some of them have been successful. Currently, Audi, the Audi manufacturing plant is on strike right now. Caterpillar facility in Nuevo Laredo is on strike right now. And before the implementation of the labor law reform, for many years, you didn't have any strike in Mexico. Because of this system of repression and control of the demands of the labor movement, and because of the active role of the state in repressing any attempt. So to respond very specifically to your question, INEGI, the INEGI, have fresh data on strikes in Mexico, including 2023. And the takeaway, what was the takeaway on, sorry, Gaspar?
The second one?
Yeah.
The second one is what are the most relevant takeaways from recent Mexican Labor Secretary data
Okay.
on implementation of the labor law reform.
Okay, yeah, so the other data that's been published is on union density. And just to go back to what I was mentioning before, the data is calculated by dividing the number of unionized workers by the number of workers employed in the formal economy. So union workers can be unionized. And there can be questioned that this is the way to calculate union density, because you can also suggest the union density should be calculated by dividing the number of union workers by the total population of active workers. So this is for the person who asked the question. This could be something to discuss on how we can strengthen the debate on the impact of the labor law reform. We're also working on this. Actually, we're working with the students of the binational class to think about this information, this data, and how we can produce more data to open a debate about the impact of the labor reform, the impact of the contract negotiations, how an independent union provide more or less benefits than an employee protection union based on research. So yeah, thanks for the question.
Let's go to the room, Brian.
So I was really interested to hear, I'd be interested to hear a little more about the labor reform law that was passed in 2019, because some aspects of it, at least from a US perspective, were really innovative, like a labor court system, for example.
Yeah.
I studied Brazil, it's had a labor court system since the 1930s.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, like Mexico clearly did not get the inspiration for a labor court system from the United States. What models was Mexico looking to with its labor reform, the court system specifically?
That's a very good question. That's a very good question. I think that there are important labor attorneys that have been promoting this reform for many years. Democratic lawyers that have been promoting this innovation. They've been looking, of course, at the United States, like 30%, that you need to collect to get a certificate of representation. But they've been looking also at Latin America. And in terms of the impact of the new labor courts, that's been also one of the most, I think, ambitious operation that also needs a lot of capacity building. In fact, at the local level, sometimes is where most of these relationship and system of collusion that characterize labor relation for many years are more entrenched. And many of these processes that I shared, many of these organizing drive, had encountered the main challenges at the local level, particularly with the labor courts, where the political relationship with the local authority are still very central in the way the decisions have been taken. So definitely innovative, and still one of the area where the new administration will have to think on how to strengthen the current institution, strengthen the capacity of the labor courts, and ensure that they work more independently from that local context.
Can I ask just a quick follow-up? Where does the court reside in administratively? Where is it within the Ministry of Labor? Where does it exist in terms of?
You have local labor courts at the local level.
labor courts,
Yeah,
okay.
at the local level. Yeah.
So let me go to two questions online. Our colleague from the Labor Center, Yana Sharok Hernandez, asks, can you share some examples where U.S. worker to Mexican worker solidarity and organizing have played a role in gaining protection and wage increase for Mexican workers? Can you explain how the reform mechanisms put in place have facilitated this cross-border solidarity? And a separate question from Alma Rico is, can we activate the rapid response mechanism for political violence or discrimination against women workers that impede their participation in trade unions?
Great questions. So here you have some of the cases, some of the organizing drive, again, that I described before, where the rapid response mechanism has been used. In the case of the GM Silao campaign, in the case of the Stellantis campaign, the rapid response mechanism petition has been filed jointly by US and Mexican Union. So in the case of, well, actually the Stellantis, sorry, not GM. GM was self-initiated. Stellantis was filed by the UAW, Los Mineros, the miners union. The UAW and the miners union. So both unions have been directly involved in the investigation, in the identification of violation, the monitoring of the process, and in terms of the political pressure that a U.S. union can put on a U.S.-based institution like the Department of Labor, the trade representative, is definitely an important collaboration. It was definitely an important collaboration, but UAW also sent folks to Coahuila, which is also like a very remote area to travel to. You don't just fly to Monclova. You have to fly. You have to take a drive into the desert. So it was challenging to get there, and yet they sent folks out of the factory during the union election to show solidarity. These are photos from GM, but you see there are people from the steelworkers. Right? There are people from the steelworkers, the machinists, the UAW, from LACUT in Brazil, from other organizations that really sent folks to support the movement. So that was an important way to show solidarity. There are constant exchanges between US and Mexican Union in terms of capacity building, best practices. And I think that it will be more important to have more strategic conversation again about the supply chain in North America, and think about our organizing targets more broadly in terms of the region in the future.
The second question was about if we can activate the rapid response mechanism for political violence or discrimination against women workers that impede participation in trade unions.
Yes, so, well, the rapid response mechanism cover specific facilities, a specific sector, and regarding the right of freedom of association and the right to bargain collectively. So as long as the exclusion of women represent a violation of their right to organize and bargain collectively, that's when the rapid response mechanism can be used. Unfortunately, it can be just if there was a case of gender discrimination. But if that discrimination becomes like an anti-union discrimination, it would be relevant for the rapid response mechanism.
Great. Questions in the room? Chris and then Toby. Go, Chris.
Okay, I unfortunately have three questions, so you can always just choose your favorite. But
yes,
one is that labor scholars talk about the union threat effect, which is that when unionized workers get better terms, sometimes non-union companies improve their terms. We saw that after the UAW strike.
yes.
So I'm wondering if we're seeing a union threat effect with these sort of real unions. Are the fake unions beginning to actually improve some of their conditions so that they can compete more effectively, which might mean that there's actually broader effects than it would sound like from the small number of organizing victories so far? That's question one. Question two is I'm fascinated by your mention of sectoral bargaining in the tire industry, and I'm wondering if you know more, can say more about what does Mexican law say about sectoral bargaining? Is there some potential for expanding that? And the third question is, where does Canada fit in? Because you haven't mentioned Canada. We in the United States sometimes think of Canada as just an appendage of the United States, but I can assure you that Canada and Canadian trade unions do not think of themselves that way. So if there's anything to add about Canada's role.
Thanks, Chris. Great questions. So regarding the threat effect, there are some cases, for instance, during the union drive at VU Manufacturing in Piedras Negras, Coahuila, while they were negotiating their contract, the same union that controlled all the collective bargaining agreement in the industrial area raised by 20% the wage in one of the factory controlled. it's like an extraordinary case. I didn't hear of any other like this, but that tells of the attempt to discredit independent unions organizing tribe and negotiation collective bargaining efforts by providing like a reference that they can use to see like this is what we're doing, we're actually moving. I also think that what I call neo-corporatist union are also playing a role in trying to present a new face for the old union organizations. And they actually do something different. So they have organizers. So there are cases where they do have organizers that go in the factory, and it's not the kind of organizing we expect. Maybe they don't lead the organizing drive in the negotiation, the collective bargaining process the way we would expect by a union in the US, but they're doing step, to create some contact with workers and show a copy of the collective bargaining agreement, for instance. You have to comply with those minimum requirements by the labor law reform, and in some cases, these organizations have to do that. Sectoral bargaining, there are a few example in Mexico of the contrato ley, industry-wide contract. It's in the tire, in the garment sector, in telecommunication, among other. And the tire sector is the most interesting because they really offer great benefit compared to the current contract. So 30% wage increases to comply with the sectoral agreement. They have a number of articles that regulate work inside the factory in terms of shift, in terms of way to move workers from one area to the other, that are really providing like great benefits to workers. And for now, the contract, the sectoral agreement is active in Goodyear. So now the efforts of like the next steps for the future is how they can reactivate the collective bargaining, the sectoral, the industry-wide agreement, all the facility, the entire industry facility that should be covered by the contract. Actually, in this case, the rapid response labor mechanism has been filed against the individual contract. So the individual contract that the previous union, Teresa Medina Union, signed with Goodyear has been recognized as a denegation of rights because enforced provisions that were below those established by the industry-wide contract. And so that created an opportunity to reactivate the contract at that level. Now it's been implemented. They just wrap up negotiation last week. So it's been implemented in Goodyear. It's been implementing in Goodyear, but now is how we push for this contract to be implemented at the national level with the other facilities. And then how we think about sectoral bargaining and industry-wide bargaining, for other industry, for other sectors. And where does Canada fit? There are efforts and collaboration with various unions. Cynthia worked very closely with Unifor, for instance, and other organizations. I think that that's an additional question or an additional step for the future to the supply chain approach, right? We have new allies for the U.S. labor movement in Mexico, and how we establish a strategic conversation about targeting and how we can build power in the supply chain, and so how we establish a new relationship between this organization, and then how we strengthen the existing relationship between the U.S. and Canadian labor movement, how we learn from those relationships that have been particularly strong in the history, and how we improve those that need to be improved.
Let's go to a final question with Toby, and before we go to that, if you can fill out the survey, that'd be great. I'm gonna pass it around. We need your help in terms of doing that. So, Toby, please.
Thank you, Paulo. This is so fascinating, and You know, as you're well aware, the U.S. labor movement has a history, especially during the Cold War, of being a bad actor, not only in Mexico and Latin America, but around the world, of disrupting democratic labor unions under the guise of anti-communism, and in other ways being imperious. As we explore this opportunity to, be in solidarity with other workers and unions in Mexico and across the continent and maybe beyond, what kind of lessons or best practices might you suggest to the labor movement or the people in the labor movement who want to support unions in Mexico and workers in Mexico? How should they be rethinking some of their practices? And for instance, I noticed some of the organizations like the Labor Alliance for Latin American Advancement, which is does a lot of great work. Also, is a super Cold War kind of not very progressive organization until maybe recently. What do we do about that? Maybe a decolonial version of the labor movement.
Yeah, well, I think that this is very important, right? And also how we can rethink the relationship between the two, between the labor movements. And I think that fostering and promoting worker to worker and union to union direct relationship can be important. At this time, because of the labor law reform, because of the USMCA, there is an important amount of funding poured by various institutions, including the US government, to strengthen union, to build the union capacity. And I think that that's been a resource, an important resource for the labor movement. But we also have to think about sustainability and how all these efforts will be able to last when this funding won't be there anymore. When we won't have a number of experts that are assisting the labor movement, and how we can now build the infrastructure for that transnational solidarity that is directly preceded by workers and is worker led. And I think that in terms of unions, there is an alignment in the interest of U.S. workers and Mexican workers, and it's not always part of the perspective of unions, but we've seen how the interests of both interests are structurally linked by the North American economy, and so that I think is an opportunity to think about how we can achieve common goals that are related based on the direct collaboration of labor organizations, particularly between unions. And we have the example of global unions, framework agreement, supply chain alliances at the global level. Maybe that sort of infrastructure could be helpful in North America with such an integrated economy to think about how we really strengthen those relationships, again, not based on theory or because we're all part of the working class, but because of common goals and how we act to achieve those goals based on a common agenda. That might be a way to go beyond the history of the U.S. intervention in Latin America and